That evening, I was trying to steady my mind after a long day packed with plans for the week ahead. Suddenly, the phone beside my hand lit up with a message that froze me in place. I am Colleen, 32 years old, someone who has spent years trying to claim even a small space in the family I was born into, yet never truly belonged to. I opened the text from Mom with a faint hope that their anniversary celebration might finally be the moment we closed the distance between us. That hope disappeared the moment the words appeared on my screen. No deadbeats allowed at the party this year. Only your sister and her family are invited. There was no explanation and no hesitation, only a blunt rejection that reminded me my efforts had never held any real value in their eyes. I remained still for a long time, not because the message shocked me, but because I had grown far too familiar with being pushed out of everything that should have included me, even though it still managed to hurt in its own quiet way. They had no idea I had spent months preparing something meaningful for their celebration, hoping for one chance to be acknowledged. They also did not know that everything I had built in silence had grown strong enough to change the story completely. 1 week after that message, the daughter they casually labeled a deadbeat was the one hosting the largest family gathering at a beachfront villa they never imagined I could own. And then a certain party collapsed in the most uncomfortable way, leaving nothing but awkward glances scattered across the room. What do you think about the way they treated me? Stay with me and share your thoughts in the comments, because what comes next might make you reflect on your own family too. The early years offered more quiet lessons than I ever expected to carry into adulthood. Those lessons began forming long before I understood how deeply they would settle into my sense of belonging. Growing up, I recognized patterns that shaped the dynamic in our house, even though I could not yet articulate why I always felt like the background figure in a family portrait centered around my sister Lauren. I assumed every sibling relationship carried this kind of imbalance until enough moments accumulated for me to realize it was not simply childhood perception, but a structural truth in our home. Mom enrolled Lauren in every class she could find, filling afternoons and weekends with activities that gave them endless conversations. I watched from nearby as they reviewed schedules and celebrated each small milestone, not because I resented her achievements, but because I noticed how rarely anyone asked what I wanted to try. Whenever I mentioned an interest of my own, Mom's response was always practical, explaining that resources needed to be directed where they would have the most impact. Dad, absorbed in his usual routines, echoed the idea that I should be patient and supportive. Over time, patience turned into resignation, and resignation quietly reshaped how I saw myself. One memory marked that shift clearly. I brought home a school project I had poured weeks into, believing it might earn a small moment of encouragement. I placed it on the counter while Mom prepared dinner, hoping she would ask about it. She glanced at it briefly before pivoting into a detailed account of Lauren advancing to a higher-level class. The entire conversation drifted past me before I could speak. I carried the project back to my room without insisting on attention. That evening stayed with me because it revealed how effortlessly my presence could fade from their awareness. Years later, during one of Lauren's school events, Mom and Dad moved around her with an energy I rarely saw directed my way. I sat on the stairs, adjusting my backpack, listening to their excitement, and understood that I had been assigned a quieter role long before I noticed the shift. There was no hostility in the air, only a lack of curiosity about who I was becoming. That absence created a divide that widened throughout high school, not through conflict, but through understanding. Lauren thrived on the path they paved for her, while I learned to navigate life with minimal expectations. The turning point came one evening when I overheard Mom telling Dad that Lauren's achievements helped the family's image. The implication was sharp enough to settle deeply. In that moment, I decided to stop waiting for recognition. If I wanted a life that felt like my own, I would have to build it without expecting my parents to notice. That realization became the foundation for the independence I later relied on, shaping the distance that eventually gave me room to grow. When I stepped into adulthood, I quickly realized that leaving home did not magically erase the imbalance that had shaped most of my early years. I moved away from Long Beach because I needed to build something that belonged only to me, even if I did not yet know what that would look like. I took a job in the hospitality field, a position far below anything impressive, yet it was the only offer that did not require a referral from mom or dad. I accepted it because I wanted the chance to prove that my value did not have to come from family approval. My first months were brutally demanding. I worked at a small coastal inn that struggled to keep enough staff on any given week, which forced me to learn every task from laundry management to late-night guest issues. The hours stretched endlessly and the pay barely covered rent, but I stayed because each shift taught me something that felt useful. I began to recognize patterns in guest behavior, especially the subtle details that determined whether they felt welcomed or overlooked. Those observations started shaping the way I approached every interaction, and I slowly discovered that I had a talent for anticipating needs before people voiced them. During that period, I returned home only for major holidays. Each time I walked through the front door, Mom greeted me with a brief nod before asking a series of questions about Lauren, as if she could not maintain a conversation without steering it back to my sister. I often answered politely, but the exchanges left a quiet ache that lingered long after I drove away. I tried not to resent the predictability of it, yet it reminded me that nothing had changed in the family dynamic. Those visits encouraged me to focus on creating stability for myself instead of hoping for emotional space that never existed. While I continued learning the basics of hospitality, unexpected opportunities appeared. The inn occasionally received guests who struggled with last-minute travel problems. I became the person they turned to because I remained calm when situations escalated. Some guests asked for my direct contact whenever they returned to town because they trusted my judgment. That trust gave me more responsibility, and soon I was coordinating guest accommodations during busy seasons. I handled complicated scheduling high-maintenance clients and unique requests that required careful planning. Those experiences sharpened skills that would later become the foundation of my career. Eventually, I realized that I enjoyed understanding what made people feel at ease in unfamiliar places. I watched how small gestures transformed stressful travel into memorable experiences. That realization pushed me to explore vacation rental management since it allowed greater creativity and independence. I spent evenings researching guest preferences, maintenance planning, and pricing strategies without telling my family. I wanted to reach a point where I could present my achievements without feeling overshadowed by anyone else. The more I learned, the clearer it became that I thrived in environments that rewarded consistency and emotional intelligence. I stopped comparing myself to Lauren because the comparison no longer mattered. It had taken years to understand that approval from mom or dad could not be the measure of my success. That understanding grew stronger each time I solved a problem without assistance, or calmed a frustrated guest with thoughtful communication. My work started reflecting a confidence I had never shown at home. As I moved deeper into the industry, I sensed that a shift was coming, even though I could not define it. The long days felt less discouraging once I recognized that I had options beyond surviving paycheck to paycheck. Those moments marked the beginning of a transition that would eventually lead me to opportunities none of my family could imagine. I felt the ground beneath me begin to steady, and for the first time since childhood, I sensed a future shaped by my own choices rather than the limitations that had followed me for so long. That summer marked the moment everything shifted in a direction I had not prepared for, although the lessons that followed shaped every decision I made afterward. I had been working on a small project with a local partner who promised to connect me with a steady stream of short-term rental clients. I believed him because he sounded confident and experienced, and I wanted to prove to myself that I could build something without leaning on anyone in my family. A few months later, I learned that every promise he made had been empty. He disappeared with the deposits from several bookings that I had worked hard to secure and left me facing multiple guests who expected a service I could not deliver. I spent 2 days trying to untangle the damage before realizing that the collaboration had already collapsed. I felt foolish for trusting someone who had never earned my trust, yet I also recognized that I had allowed desperation to influence my choices. When I finally gathered the courage to talk about it, my best friend Carmen arrived at my apartment with a bag of takeout and listened while I explained the situation. She did not try to fix anything. She only reminded me that I knew how to work with people, and that the skills I had gained were still mine. Her presence helped me stop blaming myself long enough to think clearly about what I wanted next. Once the frustration eased, I looked again at the small contacts I had made over the past year. Several travelers had mentioned that they could not find rentals with reliable hosts during the busy season. A few even said they would book with me again if I ever managed a place on my own. Those conversations returned to me with surprising clarity. I started to wonder if the failure with my partner had been the final push I needed to try something I had been avoiding. I began researching the logistics of managing a rental property instead of simply being a coordinator. Every article pointed to the same conclusion. If I wanted control of the experience, I needed to own at least one rental space. I had no money for a house, so I started smaller. I contacted property owners who were renting out guest houses or small cottages and offered to manage everything. Most ignored me, but a couple agreed to a meeting. Within a month, I signed my first independent management contract. The work was exhausting. I cleaned, checked inventory, answered late-night calls, and handled the scheduling myself. I learned how to balance budgets, negotiate with cleaners, and communicate with travelers in a calm and professional tone. Every successful stay helped me build a record that attracted more clients. My earnings were still modest, yet for the first time I saw a path that belonged only to me. By the end of that season, I managed 3 properties with consistent bookings. I knew I would need something bigger if I wanted long-term stability, but the foundation had been laid. I no longer saw myself as someone scraping by. I had become a person capable of creating opportunities from nothing. As that realization settled in, I felt a shift that told me everything ahead would change faster than I expected. 1 week before my parents' anniversary celebration, I felt a quiet thrill running beneath the surface of my usually steady routine. After years of working through uncertainty, I finally reached a point where the long hours of managing guests, negotiating seasonal rentals, refining service plans, and studying market shifts formed something stronger than a career. They built a foundation that attracted a group of investors who believed in the potential of my hospitality model. The contract we signed that week gave me the financial scope to purchase a $5 million villa on the Long Beach shoreline. The villa had enough space to host retreats, reunions, company getaways, and private events, and I knew it would become a stable center for everything I had built. I wanted to announce the news during the anniversary celebration because I believed the timing held meaning. Mom and Dad had never seen my work with clear eyes yet. I hoped that presenting my accomplishment in front of our extended family might bridge a distance that had shaped my entire life. I envisioned a moment when they would understand how deeply I wanted to belong. I prepared slides that traced the development of my business, and I arranged a set of photographs showing the villa at sunset. I wrote a short message of gratitude that I planned to read at the end, one that described how their early sacrifices gave me the strength to build something meaningful. I rehearsed it several times because I wanted to sound confident rather than emotional. 2 days before the celebration, everything shifted. While reviewing booking inquiries, I received a notification from social media. Lauren had posted a photograph of her family standing beside a set of shopping bags filled with decorations. Her caption highlighted their excitement for the upcoming anniversary event. The tone implied a shared effort, as if the entire family were participating, yet the content made it unmistakably clear that I was not included. Dozens of comments from relatives applauded the preparation, assuming the event was a group project. The knowledge that no one questioned my absence created a familiar tightness in my chest. I tried to continue working, but a message arrived from Mom. Her words erased the possibility of misinterpretation. She wrote that the house did not welcome anyone who had not proven useful to the family. She added that only Lauren and her children should attend. The phrasing felt cold, and the abruptness carried an echo of moments I had tried to overcome. I read the message several times, hoping the meaning might soften, yet the intent remained sharp. I placed my phone on the table, attempting to steady my breath, and I felt the anticipation that had filled me for days sink beneath a heavy wave of disappointment. My original plan depended on their willingness to listen, and without that, the meaning of the announcement disappeared. I needed a different approach, one that came from confidence rather than longing. I opened my laptop and studied the photographs of the villa again. The shoreline extended behind the property like a quiet promise, and something inside me settled. If I wanted to build a future without the weight of their judgment, this was the moment to begin. I contacted every relative who had supported me in small ways over the years, and I invited them to a gathering at the villa on the same day as the anniversary celebration. I hired a local team to assist with catering, lighting, and setup. I developed a new version of the presentation that focused on resilience rather than approval. My goal was no longer to earn recognition from Mom and Dad. My goal was to acknowledge my own progress and create a space where people saw me without the shadow of comparison. When I finished the final arrangement, I felt calm for the first time in days. The decision changed the direction of the week, yet it also revealed a part of me I had hidden for too long. The villa was no longer only a business asset. It became a symbol of a life I built through persistence, rather than permission. The morning carried a quiet sense of resolve, and I felt ready for whatever needed to be done. I began by sending personal invitations to Aunt Evelyn, who had always shown a gentle curiosity about my work, and to Uncle Felix, who never hid his frustration when the family dynamic tilted too obviously toward Lauren. I included a short message in each invitation, not to explain myself, but to let them know the gathering at my villa would be a place where everyone could simply enjoy one another without the pressure of old patterns. Within an hour, my inbox filled with replies. Their enthusiasm surprised me, although a small part of me recognized the undercurrent of dissatisfaction that had lingered for years beneath polite conversations during family events. Several cousins confirmed they would come, and one even mentioned that she felt relieved to have an alternative to the usual anniversary celebration hosted by my parents. I sensed a shift that had nothing to do with the villa, and everything to do with the way people had quietly tired of the hierarchy that shaped so many gatherings. Throughout the day, I coordinated the final preparations. I booked a local chef who specialized in small private events and understood how to create an atmosphere that felt both intentional and warm, without turning the evening into something overly formal. I reviewed the seating plan to ensure that conversations could unfold with ease. The villa had enough space to accommodate everyone comfortably, so I focused on details related to flow rather than spectacle. I met with the service team to discuss timing and logistics, keeping the emphasis on smooth transitions rather than elaborate displays. I wanted the gathering to feel alive, in a way the traditional anniversary dinner never did. News of the upcoming event traveled through the family faster than I expected. It started with a message from a distant cousin who casually mentioned that Lauren seemed unusually curious about my whereabouts. I brushed it aside until another relative contacted me with a similar comment. By late afternoon, it became clear that Lauren had heard about the preparations and reacted in a way that mixed confusion with irritation. Nobody used those exact words, but every hint pointed in that direction. It was not difficult to imagine how she interpreted the idea of a second gathering on the same day as my parents' anniversary celebration. I knew she would assume it was a challenge to her importance within the family, even though my intention centered on something entirely different. My phone rang in the early evening and the caller ID displayed her name. I watched the screen as it vibrated, aware that answering would pull me into a conversation filled with questions I had no intention of validating. The call continued for a long moment before it finally stopped. A message followed, though I did not open it. I set the phone aside because the direction I had chosen required distance from the dynamics that had shaped so much of my life. Silence felt like the first boundary I had established in years, and I held onto it with unexpected steadiness. As the sun lowered, I walked through the villa with the small team assisting me that day. Their progress impressed me. The dining area was nearly complete with arrangements that encouraged people to move freely and talk without feeling separated by formality. The chef had begun organizing the kitchen, and the preparation carried a sense of calm confidence. Everything suggested an event crafted with care rather than a demonstration of status. The energy reminded me of what the anniversary dinners once tried to be before they became occasions centered around my parents' preferences and Lauren's desire to be the highlight. By the time the final checklists were completed, I felt a quiet certainty settle in. The gathering forming around me was not a reaction to exclusion. It was the natural continuation of the life I had built on my own terms, shaped by the people who genuinely wanted to show up. The preparations reflected something deeper than celebration. They carried the promise of an entirely new beginning. The evening of my parents' anniversary arrived, and the villa filled with voices that blended curiosity, surprise, and a warmth I had not felt around family in years. Guests stepped inside with expressions that revealed more than words could. I noticed slight pauses when they caught sight of the preparations, and their reactions carried a tone that suggested they had expected far less from me. Their genuine interest pushed any lingering doubt aside, and I focused on greeting each person without lingering on the memories of past gatherings where I barely received acknowledgement. Conversations unfolded with an ease that felt new, free from the tension that always surrounded events led by my parents. My Aunt Evelyn approached first, greeting me with an enthusiasm that said she had waited a long time to see me receive a moment that felt entirely mine. Uncle Felix followed with a quiet but sincere remark about being glad to celebrate somewhere that did not require stepping around unresolved conflicts. Their attitudes hinted at frustrations they had held back during previous years, yet they did not dwell on complaints. Instead, they took the chance to appreciate what was in front of them. The room soon filled with relatives who had privately grown uncomfortable with the atmosphere at the traditional celebration. Tonight, they were determined to enjoy something different. As the evening developed, I felt the conversation shifting toward my work. People asked thoughtful questions without condescension. They wanted to know how I had built my business, how I managed bookings, and what inspired certain decisions. Their curiosity lacked the dismissive undertone that once overshadowed every exchange at family events. Instead of shrinking into silence, I spoke openly because they genuinely listened. For the first time in a long while, I sensed acceptance forming without conditions. The atmosphere created a space where I did not feel compared to Lauren or viewed through assumptions that had followed me since childhood. Halfway through the gathering, a notification appeared on several relatives' phones. It came from Lauren's public Facebook page. She had posted a picture from her own event and included a caption that read, "Some people love pretending they're successful. Borrowed villas don't change who you really are." The comments spread quickly among the guests, and a noticeable shift followed. Murmurs rose, not directed at me but at the pettiness of the remark. A few cousins exchanged unimpressed looks, questioning why Lauren chose to broadcast hostility in a moment that should have belonged to our parents. What surprised me was how few people entertained the accusation. They knew enough about my progress to dismiss the suggestion that anything here was borrowed. The criticism Lauren intended for me only revealed more about her behavior. It created an unintentional contrast between both gatherings. While her celebration became overshadowed by negativity, mine continued with comfort and steady conversation. A distant relative mentioned that people at my parents' event seemed unsettled by the tension surrounding Lauren's attitude. Another said the atmosphere there felt more like a performance than a celebration. Their comments were not meant to flatter me. They described impressions formed from observation rather than sides taken out of loyalty. Shortly after the post circulated, my phone rang. It was Dad. His voice carried agitation when he said, "Don't ruin our day." I listened to the words without reacting. The call represented expectations that no longer had influence over me. I let the phone return to silence because the evening was not about conflict. It was about reclaiming the space I had worked for, one that did not require justification to exist. I chose not to let old patterns interrupt the progress unfolding around me. As the night settled, conversations deepened without turning heavy. People stayed longer than expected, and their presence felt sincere rather than obligatory. No one compared me to Lauren. No one questioned my decisions. They simply enjoyed the environment created by effort that had gone unnoticed for far too long. I realized the gathering had become more than an alternative celebration. It marked a shift that had taken years to reach, where validation came not from approval, but from the freedom to exist without apology. The morning unfolded with a tense quiet that felt heavier than the warm light slipping through the villa's tall windows. When I stepped onto the terrace, Mom and Dad were already standing near the railing, as if they had marched straight in with nothing but indignation driving them forward. Their expressions carried a familiar mix of disappointment and superiority that once struck me deeply, although it no longer held the same power. Mom spoke first in a clipped tone that belonged to her most judgmental moods, insisting that my gathering had humiliated them during their anniversary celebration. Dad added that I had selfishly overshadowed a day that belonged to them, which framed me again as a disruptive presence instead of a daughter. I listened without interrupting because defensiveness would only validate the narrative they had crafted for years. My voice stayed calm when I explained that I owed them nothing after the message they had sent and the exclusion they had chosen without hesitation. The silence that followed felt different from previous confrontations because the emotional balance had shifted. I no longer felt the urge to convince them of my worth or argue for space at their table. I only stated that I was choosing distance for the sake of my own peace. Lauren arrived minutes later, looking distressed in a way I had never seen. Her online post had spiraled quickly, igniting criticism from colleagues who questioned her professionalism and prompting her manager to warn her about the damage she was creating for the company. Friends who once echoed every opinion she voiced had stepped away without offering explanations. She attempted to shift the responsibility toward me, yet the consequences belonged fully to her choices. When she demanded support, the words stumbled because she sensed that I had no intention of accepting the familiar burden again. Several relatives joined us outside shortly after, though their presence carried warmth instead of conflict. Aunt Evelyn spoke gently about how long the extended family had recognized the pattern of favoritism, and her sincerity softened the moment. Uncle Felix added that the atmosphere at my gathering had reminded them of what family could feel like when generosity guided the room instead of judgment. Their statements created an undeniable contrast that Mom and Dad could not ignore. They exchanged a look filled with discomfort because the loss of respect had become visible rather than implied. My resolve felt grounded as I took a step back from the conversation, choosing a life free from the emotional turbulence they had normalized. Their disappointment no longer felt like a burden I needed to carry. The villa remained bright behind me, while the path ahead felt broader than anything I had known within this family's orbit. I learned that distance can be an act of courage when repeated harm has worn down every effort to stay. Love cannot thrive where respect is absent, and peace cannot exist where loyalty is demanded but never reciprocated. Walking away from unhealthy ties is not abandonment, but a declaration of self-worth. Sometimes the greatest transformation begins the moment we stop chasing roles that others refuse to let us grow into. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If any part of my story echoes something in your own life, I would truly appreciate hearing your thoughts. Share your perspective in the comments because your voice may help someone who feels alone in similar struggles. If you would like to follow more stories about resilience and self-discovery, I invite you to stay connected and join me for the next chapter.